Evening. This is the July 30th regular board meeting of the Board of Education, the Livermore Valley Joint Unified School District. Our boardroom is open with an in-person format. However, we will continue to broadcast our meetings over Zoom to provide the opportunity for our community to observe in real time. The Board of Education of the Livermore Valley Joint Unified School District is now reconvening to open session, and it is 7:03 p.m. This is the regular meeting of the Board of Education at the Livermore Valley Joint Unified School District. And as president, this meeting is now called to order. Please be advised that our board meetings are televised on local channel 28 on Wednesday and Saturday evenings, and Monday, Friday, and Saturday mornings. We are going to begin with the flag salute, and I will invite Superintendent Gibson to lead us in the pledge.
Please stand. Ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. We are just coming back from closed session, and we have no actions that were approved in closed session to be reported out. I'm just going to go through our meeting procedures. This is, as I said before, this is our regular meeting of the Board of Education for Livermore Valley Joint Unified School District, where the primary focus is the education of students in this district. During this meeting, members of the public will have the opportunity to share information and voice their ideas and concerns regarding matters within the jurisdiction of this public agency. During the board's discussion of each agenda item, there will be a time for you to have the opportunity to speak to that item. If the topic you want to address is not on the agenda, although not mandatory, we would encourage you to please fill out and turn in a tan speaker card. I believe you can find them up on the table up there. And you will then be called to speak on that topic during communications from the public. If you wish to address a topic that is on the agenda, please fill out the blue speaker card. And I will call your names in no particular order to speak to the board for no more than 3 minutes. As another reminder, our meetings are televised on cable channel 28 Wednesday, Saturday evenings, and Monday mornings, and Friday and Saturday mornings. With that, I would like to ask Dr. Gibson if there are any changes to the agenda.
No, there are not.
Okay. We do not have our student board members yet. Hopefully not next meeting, but maybe the one after that, because our students are not in school. So we will look forward to our student reports, and we will now go to our Employee Association reports. And I see Amy Thompson, the president of LEA. As she is walking up here, I just want to recognize Tara Lutz. Did I say that right, Tara? Okay. She's the vice president. Our CSEA president is Stephanie Wagner. I don't believe she's here. Our SEIU president is Kirsty Governor, and the representative for CMC is Lily Lopez. With that, I will turn the time over to Ms. Amy Thompson.
Thank you. God, I'm not used to being put up so quickly. Good evening, Board President Peruso, members of the board, Superintendent Gibson, and Cabinet. I'm Amy Thompson, President of the Livermore Education Association, representing teachers, nurses, counselors, psychologists, speech pathologists, and teachers on special assignment. First, I want to welcome Dr. Gibson as our new superintendent and Tara Lutz as the new VP of LEA. They will share a special bond because this is, for both of them, their first board meeting officially in their offices. Last week, the LEA Political Action Committee interviewed candidates for the school board. The committee will be making recommendations for candidate endorsement to our representative council on August 15th for a vote. Tara and I, along with the executive board, have been busy preparing for the new hire orientation next week on August 7th, where we will welcome approximately 50 new members to Livermore. As of Friday, it looks like we have most of our positions filled, and we are almost fully staffed for the year. It seems like the most difficult to fill positions are the dual immersion and special education, and then we have a couple lingering things in science, math, career technical education, English, and some middle school core. Many of our members have started returning to school to prepare to welcome our students back for the new year. The first official paid day of work is August 12th, the Teacher Work Day. Teachers will be busy arranging furniture, setting up bulletin boards, making name tags, labeling files and workbooks and notebooks, reviewing cumulative files and reviewing IEPs and reviewing 504s, and planning for the first week of instruction. Phew. That is a lot to get done in one day. And then August 13th, we will be prepared to welcome back and provide the best for our students. Thank you.
Thank you. This is the time for our communication from the public, and I don't believe I have any cards. So we're going to move on to our correspondence, and I'd ask our clerk if they could summarize our any of our correspondence.
President Pruso, we have no formal correspondence to report.
Okay, this is the fastest meeting fastest in the West. Okay. We're going to move on to our information discussion items, so I'm going to turn the time over to Dr. Gibson to introduce our first presenter.
I'm going to turn this over to Mrs. Binky.
Thank you. Good evening, Board President Pruso, Superintendent Gibson, members of the board and cabinet. So tonight, I will be asking for the acknowledgement of receipt of the Service Employees International Union Sunshine Letter. So our SEIU Local 1021 would like to open Article 14, Pay and Allowance, and Article 16, Health and Welfare. And so the board will be asked to formally accept their proposal at the August 6th meeting. This is our sunshine meeting today of just introduction. And so I'm just asking for acknowledgement at this time of receipt of the Service Employees International Union Sunshine Letter.
I have no blue cards. Do I have any questions, comments from the board? And I'd enter, is this, we're just acknowledging? We
Nope,
don't
just
have to do anything.
acknowledgement. Yep,
Okay.
next meeting.
The next thing. All
Yep.
right, thank you.
This is just information discussion if you had any questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Dr. Gibson.
So item 8.2, I don't know if is my microphone working? It's on, the green light's on, but maybe I just need to sit closer. Sorry. Is that better?
That's better.
Okay, sorry. Newbie, I get to claim that for at least one meeting, right? So item 8.2 is the bond polling review, and I would like to invite our bond team up. We, as you know, the district consulted with a firm to go out and do some surveying for the district to determine what the availability of a school bond would be on the November ballot. At this point in time, I've asked staff to do the presentation in regards to the information that has been provided back to us from the consulting firm. We also have one consultant online as well as one present, and I will go ahead and turn it over to Ms. McNeely.
Thank you. President Pruso, members of the board, Superintendent Gibson, and cabinet. As the superintendent indicated, in May, the district contracted with Team Civics to provide communication and pre-campaign consulting services to the district. That was as stated in anticipation of a possible November 2024 bond. Included in the Team Civics network is Godby Research. Godby conducts polling throughout the Western United States on behalf of many public entities. And so this evening we have Charles Heath from Team Civics and Brian Godby from Godby Research here, and they will be presenting the results of that survey data to the board and discussing next steps and answering any questions that you have. So I'm going to slide back, let Charles come to the podium, but I will be here for any questions.
Thank you, Kim. Good evening. I'm Charles Heath from Team Civics. I'm the strategy and communications consultant that's worked with you on several recent elections, including your parcel tax and last bond. And Brian Godby's with me tonight. As Kim mentioned, over the last few months, we've been going through a process of evaluating the feasibility of a potential bond measure this November. And sort of the centerpiece of that feasibility assessment is conducting statistically reliable opinion research in your district, where we can present a potential bond measure to voters, understand what level of support we can expect, understand what their priorities are for the use of bond funds and how informational messaging influences voter opinion related to a measure. So what I'm going to do is turn it over to Brian, and he's going to walk us through the results, and then I'll come back at the end and we'll talk a little bit about the conclusions and next steps. So Brian, you can take it away.
Great. Thank you, Charles. And it looks like the presentation's up there already, so if we can go to the next slide. So brief introduction in terms of the methodology. This was an online and phone survey. Online meaning email invitations and text invitations for that online survey. And then landline, yes, there's still some people that do landline calls and cell phone calls as well, but the bulk of our responses, as is the world we live in, come from the online survey. The universe was likely November 2024 voters in the school district. We were in the field from June 24th through July 1st. The average phone survey was 25 minutes long, which is still our metric for determining how long a survey is. And we completed 400 interviews, which was our goal, and that gives us a margin of error plus or minus 4.88%. Next slide, please. And next one. The first section of the survey was a climate set of questions, which are really about what's going on in the district as background. And the first one was quality of education. As you see here, we've asked this question over the last several surveys. In this survey, we're at 64% in round numbers, saying they had a favorable view of the quality of education. Statistically speaking, that really hasn't changed. It's gone up and down a little bit, but only at the margin over the last several surveys. Next slide, please. Next slide is the favorability of the district's management of public funds. This is about 64% as well, favorable. And again, there really hasn't been much difference over the last 4 surveys. Next slide. Next slide was a general statement, agree or disagree that the district needs additional funding to do its job in a general sense, not being specific. And this one was about 44% that have a favorable opinion of the district. I'm sorry. This one was 57% have agree with that statement. And that's been largely the same, a little bit more variation over time, but really it's still within the margin of error. And then the next question 4 is our agree or disagree that the district needs to upgrade aging school facilities. So a little more specificity here. And in this case, we're at 66% in round numbers agree with that statement. In the last survey, that was 69, so statistically within the margin of error. And then in the 2022 survey, it was 67. So again, a little bit of difference, but not statistically significant. So next slide, please. Here's where we switch gears and we look at an actual ballot question. So now we're not looking at a high level or generalities, but a very specific project. And you see that question on the right-hand side of the slide. It meets all those statewide legal requirements. It's not more than 75 words. It has an authorization amount of $330 million, a tax rate of $29 per 100,000, and it raises $19 million annually. Then you see the bullets that, based on our initial discussions and previous surveys, we decided would be the focus of this particular measure. Obviously, your facilities plan and needs are a big part of that as well. We asked then definitely yes, probably no, definitely no, and we add the definitely and probablys together, and you see we're at 52% support. In round numbers. In the 23 survey, we were at 54, so a little higher. Statistically, not significantly different, but neither of those are at the 55% threshold that we need to be successful. Next slide, please. So the next slide looks at actually the next 3 slides, but I'll try to summarize this in deference to the board's time. But this is the things that we might spend the money on. These were all asked in a random order. And the order you see here is based on the voters' priorities. They were asked, does this item make you much more likely, somewhat less likely, or much less likely to support the measure, we then assign numeric values that you see across the bottom of the slide, 2, 1, -1, -2, and that creates this intensity scale that you see next to the burgundy bars. But we also add the, once we've ranked them, we add the much more likely and somewhat more likely together. And you can see that our top items in tier 1, which are statistically tied, but at the top of the list, are removing hazardous materials like asbestos and lead pipes from older school sites, providing career training facilities and equipment so students are prepared for college and in-demand jobs, update aging classrooms, science labs, and job training facilities to meet safety and instructional needs, and then upgrade 50-year-old classrooms and science labs to meet current safety and instructional standards. All of those are really the top tier items in terms of the voters' priorities. Obviously, needs to be an overlap between the voters' priorities and the facilities' needs. In the second tier, we have a variety of things that are still important, but because they start at 58% and go down from there, these items could be below the 55% threshold necessary for a measure to be successful. Next slide, please. And you see that continues on the next slide. We're still in the 50s and even into the 40s now. So we're not meeting that threshold in terms of the voters' priorities. Again, these are still important projects from an educational perspective. And then finally, next slide, we find the last items, and we're in the 40s and even into the 30s with some of these items. So they're just not priorities for the voters. Again, that's a different analysis than obviously your facilities. Next slide, please. So the next slide switches gears. This is another set of questions. Instead of just the nuts and bolts about how you might spend the money, these are informational statements as well as accountability provisions. And the methodology is largely the same, although the scale is slightly different. So you can't compare a 107 here with the previous slide, but you can compare the percentages where we've added the much more likely and somewhat more likely together. So similar to the previous items, we start in the mid-60s here with the measure will help Livermore schools qualify for millions of dollars in state matching funds that might otherwise go to other districts like LA and other areas. All of the money raised by this measure will be controlled locally and will go to our local schools and cannot be taken by the state. That's an accountability provision that's always important and is at that mid-60s level as well. None of the money for administrator salaries and other accountability components attests very well. The measure requires independent citizens oversight committee, which is actually required by Prop 39, which allows bond to be 55%. That's an important accountability provision. The measure will improve science classrooms and science labs to support opportunities for computer science, biology, biotech, chemistry, et cetera. So the science STEM kind of argument. And then the state provides limited funding for classroom repairs and requires local match to receive funding. This measure will help Livermore Valley get their share of that funding. And by the time we get to that, we're at 59%, at least somewhat more likely. So it's really the items at the top end of this list that are above that 55% threshold that we need to be successful. And next slide, please. As we move on to this list, this too was a longer set of items, but the items on this list, again, were in the mid-50s, so they're just not as important to the voters as the previous set of items. And next slide. And that continues with the third set of items for this particular, this would be, next, one more slide, sorry.
Hang on a second, Brian, we're just getting the presentation back here. There we go.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so this third slide for the informational statements, again, in the mid-50s and down, so just not as important for the voters as that first few items. So at this point in the survey, we have introduced the ballot question. We've talked about what we'd spend the money on. We've talked about the informational and accountability components. And next slide. We come back to our ballot question a second time. So now they've heard the positives. We started at 51.5 without a whole lot of information. And we're now, after giving them a good deal of information, we're at 57.8, which is certainly the bump up that we would expect. The challenge here, unfortunately, is that with that 55% threshold and with the 5% margin of error in round numbers, this 58 could easily be 53. And so we're not at the 55% threshold that we need to be successful. Now, it is a plus or minus, so it could be 5% up, but that's generally not the case in these kinds of measures. So next slide, please. Next slide is the negative side of the equation. So we have not only the positives that you saw a moment ago, but we also look at the negatives. And at the top of this list, you see with high gas and grocery prices, high rents, mortgage rates, and ongoing inflation, now is not the time for another property tax measure. And what we've seen throughout the last year and a half, in 2023, toward the end of the year, this started going down. But this year, because we haven't seen the Fed interest rate reductions, we believe people are still a little bit edgy about where inflation is, even though there's obviously data that says it's come down. But interest rates haven't come down, and that's really the leading indicator for many voters who are concerned about that. And at 48%, at least somewhat more likely to vote no, that's more than the 45% threshold to defeat this kind of bond measure. Next is something that's situational for the Bay Area, and that is the housing bond that's going to be on the ballot. And we're seeing in a few areas, anti-tax folks are using this notion of a tsunami of new taxes. And so, we're trying to be fair to both sides of the coin here, and we see that that is virtually the same level as the inflation argument. Then we go into standard anti-tax arguments, too many high-paid administrators, and this could cost over $200 a year, which is doing the math for them. Next slide, please. Shows some additional negatives. These aren't as bad. We're into the 30s. So even with the margin of error, they're just reaching the 45% threshold to defeat a measure. So these aren't as negative as some of those, the inflation and the tax tsunami housing bond arguments. So at this point, we now come to the next slide, which comes back to our ballot question. Oops, sorry. I'll wait for that. And next slide. There we go. So the next slide comes back to our ballot question for yet a third time, and this shows you where we started without much information. We were 51.5. With positive information, we go up to 57.8, but with the negatives, we're back down to 53, so again, below the 55% threshold. The real world doesn't work quite as strictly as a survey does. Obviously, we're looking to see where the high point is and where the low point is. So if you average that 58 and 53, we're probably right around 54, 55, maybe 55 if we put a positive spin on it. But with the margin of error, we're certainly well below the 55% threshold. So that's the unfortunate news here, is that we're just not really where we need to be for this kind of measure in this political and economic climate. Next slide. So the next slide gives them a little bit more information about that bond, because the tax rates are sometimes a bit abstract, even though they are required for the ballot question. Here we've done the math for them. So instead of $29 per 100,000, we explain that the average homeowner would pay about $198 per year. And you see, when you add the definitely and probably yes together, we're just at 50%, saying that they would vote yes. Obviously, that's not the 55% threshold. And then the next slide, please. So the next slide says, well, instead of $29 per 100,000, what if it was 24? And you see when you add the definitely and probably together, we only get to 51%. So again, we're still not reaching that 55% threshold, even though we are lowering the tax rate. And next slide, please. So the next slide does the math on $24 per 100,000, and that is about $164 per year for the average homeowner. And we do get a little bump, and this is really the only place in these fallback questions where we do, but we're still, not quite to 54%, and certainly not at the 55% threshold or having any cushion above that. And next slide, please. The next slide, we asked them what their opinion on the economy was, and nowhere is this back to pre-pandemic levels. So I have to say that at first, but a 13% better is one of the lowest I've seen in the last 3 months. Now, a good score in the last 3 months has been 20. So again, not back to the pre-pandemic levels on favorability on the economy, and that plays back into that argument about inflation, I think. But you can see from the July survey of last year to this year, we were at 25%. So voters were beginning to become more optimistic in the summer of 23, but now we've gone back down. And I think largely because of the debate in the political sphere, but also the lack of rate reductions at the Fed. Interest rates are still high for cars and homes, and people are feeling it. So that's the data that we have for this evening. I'm certainly happy to answer any questions you might have, or I know Charles has some concluding remarks as well.
Yeah, I'll keep going here, and then we can take questions jointly. So obviously these are challenging results, right? We had Measure G, $450 million bond on the November 2022 ballot that unfortunately came up about 4 percentage points short. The poll results that we went into that election with were actually more positive than these were. And it's interesting because there's a lot of sort of conflicting data points here. I mean, one, people have a very positive impression of your district. They have about 2/3 of your voters understand the need to upgrade local schools. But then when we put the bond proposal in front of them and tell them what it's going to cost to make these improvements, the support just isn't getting to 55%. If you kind of take the most optimistic view of these poll results, if we had a positive campaign that was really strong and absolutely no opposition, we're still we're above the pass threshold, but narrowly. So unfortunately, I think that largely just because of the current environment we're in and the economic and political anxiety that exists out there, it's a really tough time to pass bonds. So our recommendation is not to go forward this year. I think that it's important that you continue communicating with the public. Your facilities aren't going to get any newer over the next couple of years, and you need to make sure they understand that the problem's not going to solve itself, and that at some point the district is going to have to seek a bond measure from the community if we want to repair and upgrade schools. So keeping that messaging in front of them is important. And hopefully, your next opportunity to go to the ballot is in 2026, either the June primary or the November general election. Hopefully some of the political and economic issues that are sort of, limiting support right now will have gone away, and we'll find stronger support at that point. So that's a summary, and Brian and I are happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you. I have no blue cards. Stephen?
I have two methodological questions. So the first is that the text to online, so 343. Can you describe that?
Yeah, so the way the sample is drawn, first we look at the likely voter universe and figure out what is going to happen in terms of turnout. And then once we have that, we can select the voters based on a stratified approach, which means we look at 15 different demographic and geographic variables to stratify the sample. And basically, you could think about that as buckets of different demographics. And then we start our interviewing process. We start by texting those people that we have cell phones for. We call the people that we only have a landline, and the people that we might have a landline and an email, we email them. but they're all within those stratifications. So even from the beginning of the process, even though we have different ways of communicating with people, we are looking back at those demographics, which, there are 15 of them, but they're gender, ethnicity, age, partisanship, voting behavior, home ownership, et cetera. So we keep an eye on that throughout the process. And as we complete demographic groups, they get set aside and we continue calling, texting, and emailing to the demographics that haven't responded. And then by the time we're done, we have a roughly representative sample, but we go an extra step and we make sure we weight it back to the demographics in those 15 variables that we know are representative of the likely voter universe. The reality, of course, is we live in a world that online is the way to go. And most of our responses from all of our clients are, again, still in the online surveys and from that text invite, because that's just the world we live in. And if you look at any of the national surveys, you'll see that many of them are exclusively online, and very few of them have phone components. We think it's still important to call people on landlines when that's the only information we have to contact them, and that gives everybody an equal chance of participation.
You actually answered both my questions, so thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to thank both you gentlemen. I know we've worked together over the years many times, and I know that your skill set is it's very unique, and you guys tend to hit it right on the money each time. So I appreciate the data. A couple of questions. On slide, it says page 10, and it's Q6, features of the measures 2. It says likely November voters. In that slide, do you think that there's any skewing of numbers if people had knowledge, or do you account? One of the questions says modernize and upgrade science classrooms at East Avenue, but those are new. So so if there's something within the questions that, do you account for any knowledge where people might say, well, we're certainly not for that. We know that they're brand new. Is that a factor, or is it generic enough and statistically it's just insignificant?
Well,
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Brian.
Hold on just a second. I don't think that those, can you confirm for me, those science labs are not new? Not at East.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
But in any insight, that's Joe Mitchell. Joe Mitchell has new.
So, all voters bring a different level of awareness and understanding to the survey process. And so what we're measuring here is partially, right, what information they already have that's influencing their opinions. And then over the course of the survey, we also introduce information to educate and inform the voter and see how that changes responses. One thing I did notice as a consistent trend in your survey results is that when we described a project kind of generically and didn't tie it to a specific school site, it was a higher priority than it was if we were very specific about where the improvement would occur, which actually makes some sense because, if you live on one side of town and you hear that the project is going to be completed only at some school site that you may not identify with, it's going to be a lower priority for you. Whereas if you just hear about science labs and classroom upgrades generically, it's going to appeal more broadly to everyone. So, but it seems that framing your projects, in broader terms helps.
Okay. And I did. It was my mistake. I wrote a little arrow on there. I meant to write to the solar because I know we have solar at all of them, and there's a question on the solar there. Okay, and then one other question, maybe looking at what you might attribute it to outside of just work for us in messaging coming forward. It says page 5 on the bottom right corner, favorability rating of the district's management of public funds.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we've received impeccable feedback from our citizens oversight committees is both on the parcel tax and on the bond management money. And it's been impeccable, and that's always been fed back to us and had in very high regard from the public oversight committee. But yet, looking at that, I don't want to say it's a tripling, but it's over a 2.5 times unfavorable on the ratio when you go from a 3 to a 1.2. Is there something you attribute that to, or is that just the political environment we're in, or?
Brian, you want to
Yeah,
speak to that?
yeah, I think that the current political environment is very fraught for government agencies. Obviously, there's a debate at the national level that's going on, and one says government good and the other says government bad. And I think it has had an impact. Uh, there is also a group of people here, because if you do the quick math, it's about 80% that are saying they have an opinion, which also means that there are 20% that don't, and they're being honest. They have no idea what your budget situation is. And that's part of the difference between the favorability of public funds and the quality of education. More people have an opinion on the quality of education, and there isn't as big a don't know group as there is here. And so that brings the two together because you have so many people that don't know. But because these are all likely voters, this is the challenge because you've got to really get out the word from that Citizens Oversight Committee that you're doing a good job because people aren't hearing it, is the unfortunate reality.
The other thing I would point out here is it's really hard to compare the numbers there from October of 2019, which was pre-pandemic. I mean, we saw a major shift in public opinion just related to public education pre and post-pandemic. So, the numbers, while they've declined a little bit, they're more stable if you kind of compare those similar post-pandemic surveys.
Thank you.
I'm going to add something really quickly too, just from my lens. When I saw this slide initially, I think some of it possibly, who knows, could also come just from some of the media that all school districts across California have had with budgets. And it really boils down to what has happened post-pandemic with one-time funds. And I don't think school districts in general do a great job of really educating their communities about school finance. It's very complex. That's one of the topics that I have had the conversation with our bond committee about really starting that now. Not only just the education piece about school finance 101 and how it works and all the functions of it, but if I'm going to be very transparent, I was here at the last board meeting when you approved my contract, and we showed on the screen a $4.5 million structural deficit, and that has been broadly publicized. And so some of that could also play into it, and that's on our docket to be working on this school year so that we fix that deficit long before we ever go back out again.
Agreed.
Thank you for your work on this. I have a quick question. On the slides on informational statements, there's a box at the bottom that says age 60 or older, and I can't quite figure out what that's a reference to.
Yeah, that's if you it's not on that slide, but it's on a slide further down. We asked a question about the amount that would be charged to seniors being lower because they purchased their house 20 years ago or so. And so that it's item R on number 14. And it's hard to tell that they're both purple, but they are. So senior citizens, many of whom bought their homes decades ago, now live on fixed incomes and will pay significantly less than homeowners who bought their homes more recently. That's true. We don't have parcel taxes in bond measures, but it does help seniors. That question was only asked of those that are 60 years and older because a 30-year-old, this isn't relevant for them and doesn't necessarily help them become more likely. It's not really a strong argument even with your seniors, is the reality. And that's interesting because in some other districts, for the 60 plus, this is a really strong argument for a bond measure.
I see. So on slides 12 and 13, there is no over 60 question.
That's
okay,
right,
I get
yeah.
it. That's why I was confused.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. So I agree with what Charles said at the end, that this is our school sites need upgrading and maintenance work, and it's not a question of if but when. It needs to happen, and I think we just need to be constantly educating our community both about the need, but also how this type of work gets funded in a school district, because people think we somehow mismanaged the money, and that's why we're asking for it. And so I think a lot of education needs to be ongoing so that when it does come time to go to the community and ask them to support a bond, we're not having to build that knowledge from scratch. So, but I appreciate this information. It's extremely helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to echo what my colleagues have said and appreciate the effort that's gone into this and the recommendation I agree with, specifically because we're at a lower approval now than we were a year ago, and we didn't get the bond last time. My question is, I also agree with what many people have been talking about is messaging for the next bond, because it's not an if, it's a when. And it feels like we should be messaging this before the survey goes out so that we can have good results from the survey. So do you have any advice on how we can get the message out to our community? I feel like we have tried, but maybe there are things that we've missed. If you have any thoughts and ideas, I know that that Kim McNeely has put a great effort into communicating to our community engagement, Michelle Dawson as well, to get the message out there. But maybe there's some things that we're missing that maybe other districts have done that are helpful in as far as education on finances, but also allowing them to sort of see what we've done. And what are some of your thoughts, or do you have some ideas on that?
Yeah, absolutely. We did do some informational communication prior to this survey. We sent out a direct mail piece to all registered voter and parent households in the community, so
Okay.
there was some pre-education. Not a lot,
Yeah.
but starting to tell that story. I think the key is really just that consistent drip of information over time. That's how you move opinions. You can't do it in kind of a single shot. So just keeping that drumbeat going consistently. And I think what tends to really get voters' attention, and especially those non-parent voters that are kind of the key that
Yeah.
you need their support if you're going to be successful, is really showing the connection between facilities and quality education, right? Lots of people move to Livermore because of the quality of schools and the outstanding reputation your schools have. And, people have to know that we're not just building buildings to have nice buildings. We're building buildings because these classrooms and these science labs impact the quality of education we're able to deliver. And there's legitimate safety and efficiency and, issues that are at stake here. So just making sure you're being real, transparent and honest about the severity of the situation. And I think those oversight committee reports are, one of the most powerful tools you have to help build confidence in your fiscal management, because this isn't you tooting your own horn. This is an independent group of citizens that's taken a look at how you've spent money and are reporting that, you're spending it properly. So I would use every vehicle available to get that message out.
Thank you. Any other? Okay. Thank you so much. We appreciate you coming.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Gibson, we're moving on to our discussion action items.
Sorry, let me get to that page. I just want to make a really quick comment about the bond data, in that I really want to thank our bond team. I know that this data has not been easy for them to swallow. It affects their livelihoods, and they have done an amazing job with the work that we have done. So I will be working closely both with Kim and her staff, as well as our new CBO when she arrives, in hopes that we can find some areas and some ways to keep things kind of moving forward through some other grants and different things, so that hopefully we don't have to start from scratch if and when our next bond, it's really not if, it's when our next bond is supported by our community. But I know it's unsettling for them, and I just really want to commend them for sticking to the work that they've still been doing since they have started to internalize some of this data. So thank you for that, and thank you for the work that you continue to do, Kim, and your team. Moving along to a little bit more exciting, not so much Debbie Downer, sorry you guys. Discussion action item, approval of employment contract for the Assistant Superintendent of Business Services. And I'm going to invite Mrs. Robbins up to present this item.
Good evening, President Prusso, Superintendent Gibson, members of the board and cabinet. Tonight, I have the pleasure of bringing forth the approval of the employee contract for our Assistant Superintendent of Business Services. The Assistant Superintendent of Business Services is a contract position which requires you, the board, your authorization. This item is the board's discussion and possible approval of the employee contract with Kayla Wasley as the new Assistant Superintendent of Business Services for our district. The proposed contract contains the following material information. The term of the contract is from August 21st, 2024 to June 20th, 2027. The annual base salary is $276,098 for 12 months of full-time service, with annual step increase or decrease equal to that granted to the membership of the leadership team for the duration of the agreement. When only a portion of any month or year is served, the assistant superintendent's salary shall be prorated to reflect such service. The assistant superintendent shall be entitled to the same annual stipend for earned master's and/or doctorate's degrees as other members of the Leadership Management Association. The assistant superintendent shall receive the same holidays as provided to other district employees. The assistant superintendent shall be reimbursed for travel outside of the county in accordance with our board policy. The assistant superintendent shall be provided with health and welfare, including vision and dental insurance coverage with premiums cost paid by the district to the extent as such coverage is afforded to the Leadership Management Association members. The district shall provide the assistant superintendent at the district's expense with a fully paid term life insurance policy for the face amount of $200,000. In the event that the board decides to terminate the contract without cause, the assistant superintendent would be entitled to compensation equaling her then current base salary for the lesser of 12 months or the remaining term of her contract. That concludes the summary of the contract. A full copy may be reviewed on our district website as a part of this item or is available at the district office upon request. And with that, our superintendent's recommendation is to improve the employment agreement between the Livermore Valley Joint Unified School District and the Assistant Superintendent of Business Services.
I have no blue cards. Any questions or comments from the board? If not, I would entertain a motion.
I move in support of the superintendent's recommendation to approve the employment agreement between the Livermore Valley Joint Unified School District and the Assistant Superintendent of Business Services.
Second?
So I have a motion by trustee Bueno, seconded by trustee Druin. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, I'd ask the clerk to please take roll.
Trustee Bueno?
Aye.
Myself, aye. Trustee Druin?
Aye.
Trustee Guzman?
Aye.
President Prusso?
Aye. That motion carries unanimously. Looks like we're moving on to our consent items. We have 11 consent items on the agenda this evening. Does any board member wish to remove an item for separate discussion and approval? If not, and I have no blue cards on these items, I would entertain a motion.
Let's see if I can do this correct.
Okay.
President Prusso, I move that we approve consent items 10.1 through 10.11 in their entirety.
I second that.
We have a motion by trustee Druin, seconded by trustee Guzman. Any discussion on the motion? I'd ask the clerk if she could please take roll.
Trustee Druin?
Aye.
Trustee Guzman?
Aye.
Trustee Bueno?
Aye.
Myself, aye. President Prusso?
Aye. That motion carries unanimously. And on to consent items. We have 4 consent items, item resolutions on the agenda this evening, 001 through 004, 2425. Does any board member wish to remove an item for separate discussion and approval?
I don't wish to remove, I just have a general question.
Yeah.
Okay, so my question is, I know it's about closing funds and transferring balances, and when I was reading them, they're all zero. My question is just as a format, do we ever reopen these funds, or is it a permanent close? And do I need, yeah.
Once this resolution is passed, these funds are permanently closed. We can reopen them if we need to use them at a later date. These were all special reserve funds, and we moved any residual balance and interest to the self-insurance fund.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
I I would entertain a motion.
I move we approve resolution number 001-2425 through resolution number 004-2425 in their entirety.
Second.
I have a motion by trustee Wong, seconded by trustee Druin. Is there any discussion on the motion? I'd ask the clerk if she could take roll.
Trustee Guzman.
Aye.
Trustee Bueno.
Aye.
Myself, aye. Trustee Druin.
Aye.
President Prusso.
Aye, that motion carries unanimously. We had no items removed for separate discussion, so we will move on to our board reports. We'll start with trustee Guzman.
Nothing really to report other than preparing for, actually, I haven't really been preparing for the fall, and just returned from a quick family vacation. So that's about it.
Trustee Druin?
Let's see. I began meeting with Superintendent Gibson and would like to formally welcome Dr. Gibson to the dais and look forward to collaborating with her and her team to help students in our community. I attended the Chamber of Commerce Youth to Work lunch and graduated from Livermore Leadership, which is a program to, the program showcases aspects of the city, from city governance and big business to education and social services. I was skeptical initially, just a little bit, but it's a big commitment. Once a month, you're going for an entire day, but it was definitely worth it, and I would encourage people to participate in the program. You get to see behind the doors and learn about our community in ways that you wouldn't otherwise do so. So I sincerely appreciate the Chamber of Commerce for providing the program. And it was also a pleasure participating with Assistant Superintendent Menke throughout the duration of our tenure. And not unrelated, I attended a dissertation defense of a former high school student who just earned his PhD from MIT. And I think it's a testament to our work in public education that we can prepare students to complete and be successful in not just that, but all walks of life. And I think it's nice to start the year with that. I know we typically finish the year seeing all of those things, but congratulations to now Dr. Sloan.
Trustee Bueno.
Again, I would like to thank Dr. Gibson for taking the job here. We're looking forward, you have full backing, and looking forward to working with you. Leadership transitions are always difficult, and I know sometimes that causes a little bit of growing pains within an organization, but this is a really strong organization with 1,600 employees. And despite some of the economic stuff behind the scene, I know that we got a really strong assistant soup coming on to help us with that. And we have a community that's very in support of us. Listening to the bond stuff tonight, I can tell that there's just some messaging that we're going to have to work on, both as a board and as an administration and a whole body, working with all of our organized groups. And I think it's not insurmountable. I think we'll attain that. I didn't go to any dissertations, but I did go to a graduation ceremony for one of my sons who got his second doctorate. And so now he's doing a fellowship.
Fair enough.
Doctor. Yeah, it's going to be Dr. Cubed, I think. And anyway, so I'm hoping that one of the things I've noticed, it's off that topic, but if any of us have read some of the stuff that's going on, some of the blotters and things, there's been an uptick, and we know that there's in some of the gang activity in town, and it's something that we can't let go unnoticed. I've lived in this town for 40 years, and I've seen a couple of cycles, and it affects us as a school board and as a school district immediately. And I think that these kids being out of school during the summer and not having that program to help them, we know some of the causation, but working with our partners in law enforcement and other community things to help shore that up, because our nightmare is when those kids get organized with other kids and they come back to school and then they prey upon kids in our schools. So you can't turn a deaf ear to it. And it's something that we have to stay on top of, and we have really good community partners in public safety in this city. So that's it for me.
Trustee Wong.
Just want to echo all the thank yous and welcomes to Dr. Gibson. She's just been going like gangbusters, even with all the moving parts in her life of moving literally into Livermore, so welcome. I attended last week with Dr. Gibson and Dr. Thede to the Chamber of Commerce luncheon to honor and celebrate our trustee, Jerwin. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to echo what everyone has said and welcome Dr. Gibson. I know that it's been, I think it's been about a month, and I'm sure it's been fast and furious for her, but we appreciate her willing to hit the ground running and everyone getting ready for school to begin in the next short, I think we have 2 weeks. I think I saw on a post from our community engagement, we had 14 days, and I gasped a little bit when I saw it. So we're excited. We're very excited. I just wanted to thank our maintenance facilities people who've been working overtime, also our bond team who've been working overtime this summer to get all the little projects done at the schools, to get the classrooms cleaned, to get all of that stuff done. They had one less week to do it, and I know it's been a stretch for them, but they have been working amazingly, and I'm sure when you've been driving by the schools, you can see the work that they're doing and how hard they're working. I also know that the people here at the district office have been working really hard, and our administrators, administrative teams, and teachers are also working and preparing for the next couple of weeks. I also it's been nice to have a little bit of a summer break. And one thing that we're doing in our house right now that we're really enjoying, that the rest of the world is also enjoying, is watching the Olympics. So it's been really exciting. We are rooting for the women's water polo team, and we cheered hard for the women's rugby team. They got the bronze medal. It was pretty exciting. So I will now turn the time over to Dr. Gibson.
I don't know if you watched the men's gymnastics, but that was something that we talked about actually today in a meeting that I think was infectious. Just their spirit. I can't wait to see all the GIFs and memes that come out of that, as one is very zen and the rest are literally going bananas for each other until he gets out there and does his thing. So it's been a great moment, although I really wish, I said today, I wish that they would change prime time to earlier so we can go to bed sooner, because it's late nights, but it's a good time. So yes, it's been 30 days. Fast and Furious is a great example of what it's been like, but it's been truly amazing. I have been meeting with staff pretty much consistently every day, hour by hour. I appreciate those who have had to wait a little bit longer as I'm running behind from one meeting to the next. I'm finally able to start getting out to school sites and meet with principals and school staff, which is truly where I love to be. So that's been really amazing. I think I have everyone now scheduled at some point between now and August. I think I'm out to like the 27th of August. So if you're trying to get an appointment with me, I'll see you in September. Out meeting community members. I've had multiple lunch functions, coffee meetings, all the things. It's been wonderful. It's great when everybody wants to get to know you and meet you and learn all the things and feed you information. So I'm absorbing it as much as I possibly can and taking it all in. So please keep it coming. A couple of things I'm really excited about. I'm really looking forward to this Thursday. We have our first leadership workshop kickoff. And that will be at Granada High School, starts at 8 a.m., and that's where our entire district leadership team will come together. We're going to spend the day doing some fun reflection and planning and all the things. It's an area of my job that I truly love, and that I think I'm very good at facilitating some of those conversations. Really the goal, and we will present some of this information in the future, is I know we do not have a strategic plan at this time, but it's in a way, a little bit of a mini strategic plan so that we have something to focus on as a team and as a unit to kind of drive the work that we're going to be doing. So I'm looking forward to Thursday. I want to thank Doug for stepping into the interim role for us with Teresa leaving, and we're waiting for Mrs. Wasley to step in. He's just been really remarkable and hasn't blinked an eye about stepping up and taking over the reins of the business department, which is no small thing. For all staff, we will be having a little get-together on the 13th. There's more to come. I don't think that has been sent out yet, is that right? But it will be. So watch your email for the flyer for all the details of that. I know we don't have kickoff this year. I know that's a big to-do, good or bad, but I know people are a little, I think, now disappointed that we don't have that. And so I've been working with Michelle. She's been great to try and put something together for those staff who do want to come together and just kind of share space. That's, like I said, when I got here, I don't know, whatever it was, June, whatever the board meeting was, that relationships are really a priority for me. And so I think in order to build relationships, we have to create space for people to share in that. So I'm looking forward to meeting anyone and everyone from staff who want to come out and participate. Other than that, my husband and I are fully moved. All of our things are in the 94550 area code. Good or bad, it may be a little bit of a disaster at our house, but it's been a fun transition, and it's been a really amazing month, and I'm grateful and very humbled to be here, like I said before, but even more so now after spending time with staff and really getting a feel for this organization. I think it's a great fit, so thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. And I believe this may be a record, but we will adjourn our meeting at 8:03 p.m.
You're welcome.